应该禁止亲子鉴定，只要是跟你在婚内生的孩子，无论是基因谁的孩子，都是属于你的孩子。国外都是禁止做亲子鉴定的。
性价比，我的肚子我做主，我想怀哪个就怀哪个。
It's not because the man from an affair can't afford to raise the child, but because my husband is a better deal. My belly is mine to control. If I want to have a child with whichever man, I will. More and more girls are calling for legislation to ban paternity tests, following the example of foreign countries. Because generally speaking, the reason for doing a paternity test is out of suspicion, and the results often end up revealing that the child is not biologically related. This often leads to many women being kicked out by their husbands and losing long-term financial support. For example, there was that case where a husband found out that all 4 of his children were not his biological children. After this, male compatriots collectively suggested making paternity tests part of newborn health checks. Although this suggestion has many benefits, if you actually propose this to your wife, I bet if she had a C-section, she would probably jump up and slap you, or even divorce you right on the spot. So, personally, I think it's completely unnecessary. Look, if it becomes legally mandatory to do a paternity test, and you accidentally lose the child's birth certificate, or if you're too busy taking care of your wife after childbirth and a couple of months go by, and then you remember that the child's household registration hasn't been done yet when you go to register the child. The household registration office will require you to provide a paternity test to prove that this child is indeed your biological child, and not one that was trafficked or picked up from a garbage bin. You see, because of one small oversight, you will have to spend several thousand yuan on a paternity test, and all your good mood will be gone.
这个女的就是要一条道走到黑呀，一刻也没闲着。
A very popular news event recently. This woman is truly relentless, never resting for a moment. Before her marriage was even over, she already had 3 children with her lover. Her husband, enraged by his wife's infidelity, has taken her to court, and public opinion has been escalating, becoming more and more intense. Incredibly, despite the situation, she boldly had a 4th child with her lover. Her repeated actions are hard to comprehend. You could say she's not loyal, right? She has had 4 children with her lover. But if you say she is loyal, then these 4 children have nothing to do with her husband. Thankfully, she didn't meet a strong man. Had she done so, the consequences could have been even more severe. If this were a feudal society, such a woman would definitely be paraded in the streets as a moral warning, to show everyone the consequences of losing all shame. Everyone finds it strange. Why hasn't this woman divorced yet after having 4 children with someone else? The main reason seems to be that she wants her husband to continue financially supporting her and her children, continuing to make him the big fool. This husband not only worked hard for 16 years but also helplessly supported her lover. The husband had given her 25,000 yuan, but in no time, she gave that money to her lover. She even secretly helped her lover take out a loan of 300,000 yuan, which is a joint debt that both she and her husband need to repay. Look, with such a big fool of a husband, of course, she won't choose to divorce. Moreover, since this matter doesn't involve bigamy, and since this woman doesn't take her marriage seriously, she's not afraid of being criticized at all. Some people say that men who work away from home, after seeing this case, might start worrying about their wives' situation at home, and want to go back and do a paternity test. Thus, this case has become a typical example of marital infidelity. Some unhealthy trends in society indeed need to be rectified, especially the lack of ethics and moral standards. Of course, having children outside of marriage is unacceptable from both a moral and legal standpoint. There are some misguided values in society that mislead young people. For instance, some tell girls not to marry for love but for money, and then find love afterward. Such advice is truly not worth believing. How can society function like this? However, no matter what, this woman has already made an irreversible decision. Her husband's life can never return to what it was, and how will the children she's given birth to face their mother and biological father in the future?
Recently, there has been a news story from Jiangxi, where a man discovered that none of his 4 children were biologically his. Initially, he went to court over the fact that 3 of the children were not his, but during the litigation the 4th child was born, and it turned out that this child was also not his. This incident has sparked a lot of discussion. After my wife saw this news, she asked me, "What would you do if you were in his shoes?" Let's assume you want this woman to pay a price, but you can't break the law. If this were a TV drama, I might have her not survive past the first episode. But in reality, what should we do? As a man, I feel this situation is very complicated, and what else can you do? This is a moral issue, not something that can be easily handled. I said maybe he could ask for some economic compensation, but the 4 children have already been born. You can't just abandon them because you know the truth. After all, what would happen to those 4 kids? In my moment of frustration, I suggested, what if we beat her up? But my wife disagreed immediately, saying, "That's not right. That's violence and it violates the law. That would be intentional harm, which is a criminal offense. So what should we do?" In the end, the 2 of us discussed it and concluded that the man could choose to pack his things and leave, severing ties with this woman completely. You cannot continue to stay involved with her. He should go work in another place and never get entangled with her again. Honestly, you won't win against this woman. The reason is that she is the mother of the 4 children. If something happens to her, those 4 children will still call you their father, and you will have to take responsibility for them. So, stop thinking about seeking justice. What's more, it's possible that there are more than one biological fathers of these 4 children. Perhaps several men are their fathers. Are you men supposed to each take one child and raise it? This is an unsolvable problem. There is simply no way to resolve it. Some people might suggest punishing this woman, making her pay a price. But that approach isn't realistic. If you do that, in the end, you'll be the one who suffers the consequences, taking on responsibilities left by others. Are you guys going to raise these kids together or each go your separate ways and continue living your own lives? This issue cannot be resolved at all. I don't understand why some commentators discuss this issue as if they have it all figured out and speak so confidently. What can you really do? What can you do to this woman? If I were that woman facing this situation, I would just sit there, not afraid of your threats. Even if all 4 children are not your biological children, what can you do to me? Can you sue me? Arrest me? You simply can't do anything to her. What logic do you think you can reason with such a person? So men need to wake up. When choosing a wife, make sure to consider her character. Don't just get married because you're lonely or because you're getting older. Don't just find someone to marry because everyone else already has a wife and you are alone. Even when considering a woman who has been married before, you should still be cautious. You think at least people won't laugh at you in the beginning, but eventually they will. You see, this man is now the subject of ridicule across China.
我已经做过亲子鉴定了，他不是我亲生的，我不接他了。
Recently, I came across a news event. Although it is no longer fresh news, this kind of thing is becoming increasingly common, and it no longer shocks people. The main character of the event is a father who just did a paternity test, and he expressed his feelings. "I've already done the paternity test. He's not my biological child. I won't pick him up from kindergarten anymore." This child only entered kindergarten this April, and every day, it was the father who picked him up and dropped him off. The mother was never seen. From the father's words, it is clear that he has already learned the result he could not accept. The paternity test showed that the child is not his biological son. Although the father is furious and has decided not to pick up the child anymore, it seems that he cannot completely let go of his feelings for the child. Even so, he still calls every day to check on the child. This father is clearly in a state of great inner conflict. He knows the truth and cannot accept the harsh reality, but he is reluctant to sever the emotional bond he has with the child. This kind of contradictory emotion is something anyone can understand. The school tried to contact the child's mother, but they couldn't reach her. Eventually, they got in touch with the child's grandfather and uncle. However, both the grandfather and uncle showed indifference, as if they had no familial bond with the child, like a complete stranger. Although everyone is aware that the responsibility for this situation lies entirely with the mother who abandoned the child, there are always some people on the internet who fancy themselves as smart and criticize the father, without addressing the mother's responsibility. This kind of moral kidnapping, in comments, is really infuriating. Some of the comments left me speechless. One woman said, "Does it really matter whether the child is biologically yours? After all, you've raised him for so many years, even without blood ties, there's still affection. How can you just give up? This man is really heartless. Such comments are really laughable. Every time I see these, I want to ask, why don't these people criticize the child's grandfather and uncle? They at least have a blood relationship with the child. Why is no one pointing out their coldness? There's even a more outrageous voice claiming, the man must have treated the woman badly, which led the woman to abandon the child after 10 months of pregnancy. Such remarks are simply nonsensical. How can they completely shift the blame onto the man? It is shameless. What wrong did the father commit? He is not the perpetrator. He is the victim. He is filled with inner conflict and struggle. Can everyone sympathize with him? Some women even think that the father shouldn't have done the paternity test at all, that he should have kept his paternal love. This way of thinking is shocking. Are they saying that doing a paternity test is wrong? They never mention the mother's responsibility, and yet they go on to criticize the father, completely ignoring the truth. Is it really the case that everyone can pretend they don't care about whether the child is biologically theirs? If that's true, then what's the point of marriage? It makes one feel how absurd society has become. Finally, I really want to say to the child's mother, come back and take responsibility for raising the child. Otherwise, not only will you have committed a serious mistake by abandoning the child, but you might also face legal consequences.
废止。为什么很多女生反对做亲子鉴定呢？因为
With the implementation of the 2024 Civil Code, many people have become concerned about the abolition of the marriage law, especially as they have gained new insights into certain legal details regarding marriage. In particular, when it comes to paternity tests, the reaction from women has increasingly become more intense. So, why are so many women opposed to their husbands getting a paternity test? Because once it reaches the point where a paternity test is absolutely necessary, the probability that the test result shows the child is not biologically related to the husband is extremely high. How high is it? So high that the Judicial Department has issued an official interpretation. The Judicial Department has clearly stated that men's rights must be protected. If the woman refuses to conduct a paternity test without a valid reason, the man's request can be directly assumed to be valid. This means that legally, it can be directly recognized that the child is not the biological child of the husband. So, why do so many wives strongly oppose their husbands from getting a paternity test? Because deep down, they already know the truth. So how can the husband's interests be safeguarded in this regard? Many people suggest that paternity tests should be included as part of a newborn's routine medical checkup. If a man discovers that his child is not biologically his, he can request the woman to leave with nothing during divorce proceedings. The man may even be entitled to compensation for emotional distress. I don't know if everyone agrees, but I think it's a pretty good idea.
然后也理所应当的收到了很多小仙女的问候。
Recently, I suggested that paternity testing should be included in newborn health checkups. As a result, it sparked a lot of heated criticism from many women. There are also many people who disagree with this approach. For example, one netizen argued that the disadvantages of this approach outweigh the benefits. He emphasized that although he is a man and thus hopes for the widespread use of paternity tests, he also raised many reasons against it. He said that children are innocent and should not become victims. He believes that if a couple's marriage breaks down and a child is born into a broken home, the child will not be able to enjoy a complete family life from birth. He thinks this situation is very cruel for the child. Moreover, he argued that if the child is not biologically related to the father, it would be even harder for the mother to raise the child alone. The child's future might also become more difficult as a result. He stressed that if the mother does not have the support of the father, the child could end up in an even worse situation. I think a child's father is not someone who can be casually recognized. There must be responsibility for every action. Whoever the child's father is should be the one who takes responsibility. Therefore, I think it's completely unrealistic not to clarify who the child's real father is. If a woman cannot afford to raise a child on her own, then she shouldn't have a child with a lover. If you have a child with someone, you should find that person to take responsibility. After all, if you women go out and indulge in affairs with lovers and can't find someone to take responsibility, can you really blame your husband? Some people argue that the cost of paternity testing is too high. To this, I replied that nearly all men would be willing to pay for this test. Regardless of whether the child is theirs, I believe that if paternity testing were widespread, all men would be willing to bear the cost. Moreover, this would not only help resolve many family issues, but also increase the economic benefits for hospitals, creating a win-win situation where everyone benefits. I believe that the only people who would not want to do a paternity test, I don't even want to mention them. Everyone knows what I mean. Another woman told me that whether or not the child is biologically hers doesn't matter. She believes that many people live their entire lives without knowing whether the child is biologically theirs. As long as the child acknowledges them, it is enough. What matters is living happily. I want to say, if it really doesn't matter whether the child is biologically yours, why don't you go and raise someone else's child? Imagine how painful it would be to find out after raising 3 children for 16 years that none of them are yours. Haven't you considered the consequences? I really can't believe how many people nowadays have such warped views. I think these women are just making excuses for their behavior, afraid that others will find out about their shameful deeds.
Many women, when given the opportunity for infidelity within marriage, would go to great lengths to hide it, even having their husbands support the children of their lovers. Now, more and more women are calling for legislation to prohibit men from conducting paternity tests. Their reasoning is that it causes a trust crisis and disrespects women. However, the fundamental issue is that when husbands have doubts and go for a paternity test, the results usually show that the child is not biologically theirs. This has led many women to be kicked out by their husbands, losing the long-term financial support and the resources of a man who is essentially a sucker. The lovers they are involved with often have families of their own. It's merely a transactional relationship. They're not going to divorce and be with these women. Thus, these guilty consciences and chaotic personal lives, along with some women who advocate for reproductive rights and freedom, are increasingly fighting against paternity testing. In today's society, it is no longer uncommon for husbands to discover that their children are not biologically theirs. For example, there are cases where all 4 children were not biologically the husband's, or instances of couples faking divorce, with the woman ending up with 2 properties. There are countless similar cases. Infidelity within marriage is a violation of traditional moral ethics. For a husband to be forced to raise another man's children is truly disgraceful. Opposing paternity testing is merely an attempt to cover up the truth, which only exacerbates the situation. It fuels the fire and will lead more men to fear marriage and resent these women. This will only further drive down the already decreasing marriage rate. Do you support paternity tests? Feel free to leave your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support is very important to us, and we will continue to bring you better content. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.